Hi, you guys. Good afternoon. I hope you had a really good week. I'm so excited for week 2 of photography and lighting. Today, we're talking about the science of photography. Yes, you might think this is a arts course, which it is, but there's science that is behind photography and why we do what we do. Okay, so for every perfect image that has perfect lighting, beautiful colors, there's 3 different formulas that go into it. We have shutter speed, ISO, and aperture. 3 very important ingredients in our recipe. So for every recipe, say you're going to make a cake. You might use some of the same ingredients as you would for cookies, right? But it's not the same amount of each. Same thing with the 3 ingredients of photography. If we were going to make one type of image in one kind of lighting, we would need one kind of recipe. Or if we were going to take a photo, say in a dark room, we would need a different recipe for that. So in every perfect image, there's an amount of shutter speed, ISO, and aperture in every recipe. So if we get this right, we can have the perfect photo. Don't those look good? We want something just as beautiful. Okay, so this is our exposure metaphor for the day. Your camera is the same as your brain, and the lens is like your eyes. So when you think of that, that'll help you understand the lighting and why we do what we do. So first thing, for aperture, we're going to talk about kinds of aperture. So the aperture is usually has a little f at the beginning. If you're looking on your settings, it'll say f2, it'll say f4. You can change it around. It's got a big amount of different kinds of apertures you can use. But do you know what each of those mean? So for a closed down or small aperture, think of it like squinting. You can go ahead and squint your eyes right now and you can kind of get what I mean by that. There's not a lot of room for light to get into your eyes. Your image's exposure is darker the smaller your aperture. Now this is called small aperture, but the numbers are bigger. So it's kind of the opposite of what you might think, right? The squintier your eye, the bigger the number your aperture. So a small aperture is like f8, f11, f22, really big numbers, but they're called small aperture because of how small the amount of light room can get through. So you can see at the bottom right the small aperture on a lens. Okay. The smaller the aperture, or the bigger the number, the less blurry the background. So on the left-hand side, we have an example of small aperture or deep depth of field. So when you hear someone say depth of field, it might be confusing, but just think of it as a literal field. How deep is the field? How far can we see? Bigger aperture number, the bigger the depth of your field, right? So on the left, with our bigger depth of field and our small aperture, we can see a lot of those flowers, right? All right, wide open or big aperture. Think of it like opening your eyes wide like this owl. There's a lot of room for light to get into your eyes. Your image's exposure is brighter the bigger your aperture. So just the same thing, the wider your eye, the smaller your aperture number, right? So if we say we have a wide open aperture, our numbers are going to be really small. So big apertures are usually 1.8, 2.8, 4.0, 4.5. Those are pretty big apertures, right? But they're a small number. Now, if you open your eyes really wide, there's a lot of sun that can get in, right? A lot of light can get into your eyes. Same with your lens. If you look on the bottom right, you can see it's wide open. It's wide open. The bigger the aperture or the smaller the number, the more blurry your background is. A lot of professional photographers prefer a large aperture to bring more focus to the subject. So you can go ahead and try making your aperture larger or bringing that F number down to blur out the subject. You have a smaller depth of field or shallow depth of field, which means you can't see much of that field, can you? Now we're going to talk about shutter speed. How fast does the eye blink? So in this case, our lens and how fast the shutter closes, which is a piece inside of the camera that tells a camera when to start taking a photo and when to stop recording it. How fast is that going? The faster your eye blinks, the less light is let in. Go ahead and blink for me real quick. How fast are you blinking? There's not much light that can get in if you blink fast. The faster your eye blinks, the quicker action is stopped, but the less light is able to get in. So on the left-hand side, we blinked really fast, right? So we have a small amount of light that can get in, but it stopped our motion. In the middle, we blinked kind of a medium speed, right? So we have a medium amount of light that can get in, and our motion is kind of there, but it's kind of blurred. And then on the right, we blinked really slowly and we blurred our motion, but we get a lot of light into the camera. So every single one of these pieces of ingredients has to do with light and how much light gets to your camera, right? But they also do one other little special trick, like this one has to do with motion. ISO, how low can you go? That is the real question with ISO. ISO controls light and the amount of noise that is in your photo. Noise, which is also called grain. I'm sure you've seen lots of people add grain for an artistic effect on Instagram or Facebook, or even in a photo that you might see from back when your grandma took photos on her camera. There might be a lot of grain in the image. It's the spotty lack of clarity in a photo that is taken in low light. So usually if you're outside in bright sunlight, you're not really going to see any of this noise or grain. It's most obvious in the shadows of an image, and even more obvious in dark images or images taken at night or in low lighting. To avoid noise, use the lowest ISO possible for your lighting situation. So we can see the girl's cheek on the left is really nice and soft. Her eye is perfectly focused. And on the right, grain has kind of taken away some of that smoothness of her skin. And you can see it's kind of pebbly looking. It's not quite as smooth. So that's what the ISO does. It works with light, but also with the noise. So how can we possibly do all three of these things at once for a good photo? We have to put these into practice, but you're not alone. First, you need to think. How much field do I want to see? That's your aperture. Do I want to stop motion or blur it? That's your shutter speed. And how high do I need to turn the lights up? That's ISO. Just remember, the higher the ISO, the more noise. Who is the photographer's best friend? The exposure meter. That's the photographer's best friend. Inside of your viewfinder, when you look into your camera, there's going to be a little meter that looks like this. Okay? It says 0 in the middle. It says 1, 2, 3 on the right, 1, 2, 3 on the left. Usually, you only see this if you have your camera turned to manual like we talked about last week. So go ahead and turn your camera to manual. If you don't have a camera, just keep watching. You'll understand. So the exposure meter tells us what the exposure looks like. We are looking for a correct exposure. So a correct exposure is when it's spot in the middle. So perfect exposure is smack in the middle at 0. Overexposed is +1, +2, +3, and underexposed is -1, -2, and -3. Your camera will tell you if you need to change something. So we're going to try this out, and I'll show you what it means. So in order to know, okay, is there enough light in this photo? Am I doing things right? Your meter will tell you. Okay? All right, this is what's called Canon Play. Okay? This is where we're going to try out what we just learned. So here we have the 3 different things. We have aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. And we know what each of those things does, remember? So ISO is how open or closed our eye is. So we're going to open our eye with the lowest number, close our eye with the highest number. So this is going to show us the whole room. This is going to show us just what we're focusing on, which today is the plane. And it'll even show us over here, depth of field, just learned. So it'll show us that we're going to see more things or we're going to see less things. Okay, and then the shutter speed, it's going to show us right here how fast we're going to stop motion. So you see it's going to blur it that way, and it's going to stop the motion the higher the shutter speed is, the faster the shutter speed. And then the ISO just helps us with our brightness. We're going to see it's really dark, but our noise is down. You see that? And then this is going to be really bright, but there's going to be a lot of noise. That's just how it works. Okay, so I'm going to say a couple of different things we want to do with this photo of the airplane, and we're going to work them out, okay? So for this photo, I want to get just the plane in focus, and I want to blur the propeller, okay? So to get just the plane in focus, we want a big aperture, right? So we want just the plane in focus. If you need help, look at your depth of field. It'll show you that only one item is in focus. Okay, so I went with 2.8. You can go with 4.0. It'll do the same thing. And as you can see, with everything I'm doing, it's changing my exposure meter down here. This is what we need to pay attention to. So now we're going to work with our shutter speed. And I said that I wanted the propeller to be blurred. So we're going to lower our shutter speed, right? We're going to lower that shutter speed so that it's really blurred. So now we see that, we're all the way at +3. How do we change that? So we want to keep the aperture down so that, or aperture has a big aperture so that we can get only the plane in focus. We want to make the propeller spin and see that motion. So what else do we have to move? The ISO. So go ahead and look at your meter and see when is it gonna move. So we have it all the way down at ISO 100 and it's still too bright. So we're gonna have to speed up our shutter speed a little bit and maybe go to a 4, right? And keep adjusting until you get there. There we go, that's a good exposure, right? So we should be able to get what we wanted. So we're gonna go ahead and take a photo. So we have a blurry propeller here. We have just the plane in focus. The room is out of focus and these pencils are out of focus. We did perfect and we did invisible motion. Okay, and then we had a shallow depth of field, a low f-stop or a big f-stop, and we had good exposure. So our ISO helped us get a great photo. And you can see our settings here. But now let's do something different. So I want to see the whole room, but I want to stop the motion. Okay, so I want to see the whole room. So my depth of field, it's going to show me my depth of field here. But the smaller the aperture, bigger the number, the more of the room I'm going to see. So let's do like F11. I think that'll be good because you're going to see most of the room. And then the shutter speed, I said I wanted to stop the motion. So let's pull that up to stop the motion. And if you need help, look at these cheats down here. And then we're going to pull our ISO up because what does our meter tell us? That we're at -3. Keep going. All right, so we're already maxed out at ISO 25,600. That's a really high ISO. So maybe let's change a couple of things. Let's pull that shutter speed down, and we got a good exposure. Now my ISO is all the way up, so what's that going to mean? That's going to mean we're going to have a lot of digital noise. Let's see if that's true. Let's take a photo. All right, so this is a grainy photo. You can see the grain everywhere. But I did exactly what I wanted. I got the whole room in focus and I stopped the plane. Right? So every single time you get a correct exposure, you're going to have to make sure that your settings help you get there with this exposure meter. Okay? So you can figure out what you want to do with this shot and you can do that for yourself. So I want just the plane in focus. And then I want the plane to be stopped. So I actually want I don't want a grainy photo. So I'm gonna go ahead and adjust my settings. See how I just adjust it to try and get it to fit with the exposure meter? I'm gonna go ahead and click my button here. And there we go. So I stopped my motion pretty much. I see a little bit of it, but you can still tell that's a propeller. I have just the plane in focus, just like I wanted. and everything else is blurry, and it's nice and lit so we can see what's actually happening. Okay, so look at your meter, try this out. I think this is going to be really cool. You can actually do a challenge up here, which is really fun. So let's go back here. All right, let's go back. Depending on what you want to do, your exposure recipe is going to change. So just like a chef changes things up, you're going to have to be the one who decides, okay, I want to do this with my photo. All right, how am I going to do that? And you're going to have to think really hard for the first couple or 3 times that you do it, maybe even longer depending on how well you grasp the idea of using manual on your camera. But once you get it, it's going to be so easy for you to just switch from thing to thing. Okay? You made it. Week 2, we're finished with week 2 of class. Our assignments this week are to try out Canon Play. That's going to be on the Google Classroom. If you have trouble using it, just let me know. I'll send you another link. Fill out the class review. We had a class review last week. We had 2 reviews out of 7 people. So if you want to thought of class, I would really appreciate a class review. And finish the quiz for the week. This one's going to be harder. So if you would like to do that, you can talk to your parents about what they want you to do, what they need you to do. And then we have our first photo assignment. This is going to be really fun. You have to send a photo of 3 things. You can send me 3 photos. You can post it on the Google Classroom if you'd like. I have posting open so that you can post that yourself. But I need you to post 3 things. A photo of something in motion, a photo of something in low light, and a photo of something with a blurred background. Okay, that's your assignment for the week. I hope that's not too hard for you guys. If you need to, go ahead and rewatch class and see how that's done, see how I explained it. And if you have any questions, let me know. Shoot me an email, leave a comment in the Google Classroom, and I would be happy to answer that. But I hope you guys have a really good week and that you enjoyed class this week. I will see you next week.